All right. Today, what our goal is we're going to talk about, it says using narrative and information schema. And what that is, that's a part in your brain, okay? And we're activating both a narrative side and an informational side. So essentially, we're looking at our literary nonfiction as a story and a way to get information. Because these are true tales, correct? But it feels like we're reading novels, which is where that story element comes in. And we're also gaining very good information, which is where the informational schema comes in. So, having technical difficulties. There we go. So, in your Pear Deck, how would you classify your book at this point? How does it feel for you? Does it feel more like an informational text? Does it give you way more facts and figures? Or does it feel more like a novel or a fictional text where you're trying to understand characters and setting and things like that? So go ahead and answer that with your Pear Deck. Okay, so a lot of us are feeling more like it's informational text, but it's about half and half. It's interesting because some of the books do at the beginning, and that's a lot where a lot of us are. Some of the books feel like it's just facts, facts, facts. Okay, I know Chasing King's Killer comes out with facts, and so you feel like you're reading a factual book. But I know that like The Glass Castle starts, or the book Ugly starts like it is you're reading a novel. Okay, so that is interesting. All right, so here's our teaching point of the day. We are going to be alert. We're going to focus on, I need to make sure that my brain is looking for both informational and narrative features. Personally, I am somebody who prefers fictional stories. So when I read these books, I look at the characters, I look at the themes, I look at the settings, I look at the conflict. And I know Miss Moore is someone who prefers looking at information and learning from books. So she is the informational text schema person. Okay, so we have to be alert of what we usually look for and kind of make sure our brain looks for both. Okay? So we're going to practice this. This is a new section from Hidden Figures. I know we had reread something yesterday, okay? So this is we're going to practice this, and you in a moment are going to turn and talk to somebody around you, and you're going to see, okay, is this more informational or is this more like a narrative story? On her first day at work at Langley, Dorothy Vaughan spent the morning in the personnel department filling out paperwork. As part of her orientation, she held up her right hand and swore the United States Civil Service oath of office. I, Dorothy Vaughan, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She took the pledge seriously, but it was her identification badge that made her feel like an official employee. The badge, a blue metal circle featuring an image of her face with the winged NACA logo on either side, granted her access to the various facilities at the Langley lab. All right, turn and talk to someone around you. Does this feel more informational or like a story? All right, so you guys said that some of you felt like it was a story and some of you felt like it was like we saw both parts from this. So you see the facts, but you also see the character going through this. So that's great. All right. Go ahead and get out your notebooks. In your notebooks, this is the kind of stuff that if you are reading a story, this is the kind of stuff you're going to look for. You're going to look for character traits. You know, are there more than one traits? Are there traits that don't quite mesh well? Are there traits that make the character not likable? You're going to look at how characters are interacting with their settings. You're going to look at motivations and conflict, meaning if there's a problem, how is that character responding to it? You're going to look at issues that are going on and how characters react to the issues. And you're going to look at different themes. And remember, themes are the lessons that we learn. So take a second, add this to your notebook, and then we will go back to the section that we just read, and we will take a look at some of these story features and see how it matches.
Okay, so now we need to look at the informational text, the informational side, okay, and figure out how are parts fitting together. So if we're talking about the war, but then we're talking about Dorothy's personal life and how she works at NASA, how does that fit together? Okay? Is there any key vocabulary that you notice? Looking for your central ideas, looking for your details within that short section that support your central idea. Okay, so go ahead and write this down. Okay, so as I read this next section to you, whoever is partner 1, you are looking for sections that seem more narrative-like, okay? Partner 2, you are looking for sections that are more informational. As I am reading, jot down your ideas in your reader's notebook, okay? After Dorothy finished the morning's paperwork, she boarded a campus shuttle that drove her to the end of a forested back road connecting the east side of the Langley campus with the west side. She looked around at the strange landscape of 2-story brick offices and construction sites with half-finished buildings. Towering behind one of the buildings was a gigantic 3-story high ribbed metal pipe. It was part of a wind tunnel called the 16-foot high-speed tunnel, which was used for experiments on airplanes. To make the scene even more unusual, all of the buildings had been painted dark green to camouflage them against possible attacks of America's wartime enemies. The shuttle bus stopped to let Dorothy off at the front door of an office building called the Warehouse Building. She went inside and found rooms filled with desks arranged classroom style. There were office bright ceiling lights and narrow windows that looked out over the construction going on outside. From inside the rooms, Dorothy heard a new, unfamiliar sound, the steady beat of mechanical calculating machines, so big they each took up an entire desktop. It was like listening to a parade of drums, each time a click when a number was entered, a drum beat when the operations key was hit, and a full drum roll when the machine ran through a complex calculation. The same scene and the same sounds played in all the rooms where the women were working. Women were performing the same work at a similar pace on the east side. The only difference between the east computers and the west computers was obvious. All of the women sitting at the desk in Dorothy's workspace were black. Okay, now you're going to turn and talk. Partner 1, tell your partner what you were able to think about in terms of character conflict. Okay, partner 2, now tell your partner what ideas and details seem important, okay? So go ahead and I will re-pull up those paragraphs if you need to skim them again, okay? Partner 1, figure out what were you able to think about with characters conflict setting. Partner 2, what details and ideas seem important. Okay, so what you guys were saying was that your character in this section would have been Dorothy, okay? And your setting is her on the shuttle on the way towards NASA, right? And your conflicts was her struggling with the segregation, okay? Then in partner 2, what details that we said were important were that they paid money to have 2 different buildings, so the east side and the west side, to keep people of different skin colors separated, okay? And also that it was wartime, so the buildings had to be camouflaged from our enemies. Okay, so that was more of the partner 2, the informational side.
All right, so now our goal is to use our brain as both. Before it was partner 1, partner 2. Now it is, I'm going to use my brain as both. So how about your pens and pencils? You are going to jot. Do you notice characters? Do you notice conflict? Do you notice setting? Do you notice themes? Or not or, and what details, what key vocabulary, maybe some important facts that are more informational. Take notes, activating both parts of your brain, okay? The section's called Take a Seat. The room for the West Area Computing Pool was set up for about 20 workers. As members of a pool, each woman had to be ready to work on any mathematical assignment that came through the door. Because the engineering problems that Langley Lab worked on were so complex, the problems had to be broken down into smaller parts, with each part assigned to a different woman. Dorothy Vaughan took a seat, and the women welcomed her. Most had graduated from black colleges like Hampton Institute, the Virginia State College for Negroes, or Arkansas Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal College. Many of the women had years of teaching experience. Others were starting their first jobs just out of college. Quite a few of the women belonged to the same civic organizations, churches, and Greek letter organizations, such as Alpha Kappa Alpha or Delta Sigma Theta. That seems like facts. Dorothy realized that by working in Langley's West Computing section, she was one of the world's most exclusive groups. In 1940, just 2% of all black women earned college degrees, and 60% of those women became teachers, most in public elementary and high schools. At a time when just 10% of white women and not even a third of white men had earned college degrees, the West computers had found jobs at the single best and biggest aeronautical research complex in the world. Those are probably some important facts to write down about how things were during that time. At the front of the room, like teachers in a classroom, sat two white women, the West Computing section head and her assistant. The work that came to a particular section usually flowed from the top of the pyramid down. Engineers came to the head of the entire computing operation, who handed down tasks to each section head, who then divided up the work among the women in her section. Over time, some of the engineers developed favorites and brought assignments directly to the section head or even to a particular human computer. So I'm going to give you a second. It gives you the option to draw or use a text box. Use a text box, that's easier. What are some things that you jotted that seemed more story-like? That's this side. Characters, conflicts, setting. What are some things that seemed more informational? Facts, figures, things like that. Okay. Some things that we are noticing is just how characters are feeling with what's going on. And a lot of us are putting super specific facts and figures in the informational part. So how characters feel, how the conflict is affecting those characters, that's that narrative, your story schema. That's that story part in your noggin. The informational is your facts, your figures, your details, how it relates to key events or key moments in history. Okay, give me a thumbs up if that's making sense, how we can switch between the story and information. Because these books are complicated, right? And so we need to be complicated or complex readers and make sure that we're focusing on these things. Okay? Other things that we are going to do is sometimes we're going to go back into our notes and you're going to notice, oh, I have like 5 central ideas here, but I need some details to support that. The thing about central ideas is a lot of times it will scan over a big section of text or the whole text. So you may have it in your notes and you may be like, okay, I wonder if this shows up later, or I wonder how this shows up here in the story. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to focus on, okay, maybe I'm looking for details to support a theme. Maybe I'm looking for details to support a character. Maybe I'm looking for details to support a central idea. So that's what we're going to practice now. We are going to we're going to focus on a specific central idea that racial discrimination was incredibly widespread. Okay, we talked about that yesterday. And we are going to follow that idea as we read this next section called Trouble in the Lunchroom. Okay?
Okay, in the middle of the day, the women of the West Computing walked as a group over to the cafeteria. Langley was so crowded that each team has a designated 30-minute window for lunch, just enough time for a quick meal and a little conversation. Most groups sat together out of habit. For Dorothy and the West Computer, segregated seating was required. The women of West Computing were the only black women professionals at the laboratory. Not exactly excluded, but not quite included either. A white cardboard sign on a table in the back of the cafeteria said colored computers in crisply stenciled black letters. It was the only sign in the cafeteria. No other group needed assigned seating. This kind of racial insult was all too common. It was the kind of subtle jab that African Americans had learned to tolerate, if not accept, in order to function in their daily lives. The women probably expected it, but in the environment of the laboratory, a place that had chosen them for their intellectual talents, the sign seemed particularly offensive. At first, the women tried to ignore the sign. They pushed it aside and they tried to pretend it wasn't there. In the office, the women felt equal, but in the cafeteria and the bathrooms, the colored signs were a reminder that some were more equal than others. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit more. Keep jotting, please. A mathematician named Miriam Mann finally decided she didn't want to look at the cafeteria sign anymore. Not even 5 feet tall, her feet just grazing the floor when she sat down. Miriam had a huge personality. Dorothy and the other West computers watched as Miriam slipped the sign into her purse. Her small act of defiance made them all feel a bit anxious but also empowered. But the next day, the sign reappeared. Miriam removed it again. This happened again and again for weeks. Sometimes the sign disappeared for a few days or a week, sometimes longer, but each time it was eventually replaced with an identical twin. As the sign drama played itself out in the Langley cafeteria, an important civil rights case was playing out in the courts. Irene Morgan, an employee at the Baltimore-based aircraft manufacturer Glenn L. Martin Company, worked on an airplane production line. In the summer of 1944, Morgan traveled on the Greyhound bus to her hometown in Gloucester County, Virginia, next door to Hampton. On the return trip, she was arrested because she refused to move to the back of the bus. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund defended Morgan, and in 1946, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Morgan v. Virginia that segregation on interstate buses was illegal. What were the women at West Computing doing making such a fuss about a sign in the cafeteria? Outside Langley, serious civil rights battles were being fought on the streets and in the courts. They are going to fire you over that sign, Miriam, her husband said. But being black in America was a never-ending series of decisions about when to fight and when to let things go. Then they're just going to have to do it, Miriam said. All right, turn and talk. What did you notice? What details support your thoughts? How would you classify that? Is more narrative or informative? Okay, so we came up with Miriam was tired of the discrimination, so she kept removing the sign from the cafeteria. Okay, good. So, yeah, it did seem more like an informational text because it was talking about that civil suit that was happening. It was talking about the NAACP and outlawing segregated busing. Okay, what else? Okay, so it might have seemed a little bit narrative because it was talking about the characters, right? It was talking about Miriam and how she was playing a role in removing the sign from the cafeteria. So we have a little bit of both in this passage. What else are you guys? Okay, so we talked about how Miriam was persistent with removing the sign even though it would keep reappearing. And the theme that we came up with for that was don't give up. If you really feel like you believe in something, continue to fight for what you believe in. Okay, good. So what you're going to do, you're going to start reading your literary nonfiction book. You're looking for narrative details and informational details. Okay? Then we would share with our partners. Okay? What did you come up with? All right?